Hello and welcome to LM Teaches English. In this video I'm going to talk you through the poem The Charge of the Light Brigade, one of the most iconic, one of the most famous poems in the whole anthology, and that was written by Alfred Tennyson. So as usual I will talk to you about the title, about the writer, the context, which is Assessment Objective 3, and then I will go into some of the key quotes that I've picked out from the poem. I would suggest that before you watch this video, so now really, you would read the poem yourself. So if you have your anthology there, that would be best. If not, you can type it into Google and it'll come up. Like I said, it's a really famous poem. So pause the video now. Okay, now let's get started now that you've read the poem. So you probably noticed that there is a lot of repetition in this poem, and that does actually tie in nicely with the title here and what the poem is about. So it's the charge of the Light Brigade, which we know the Light Brigade are a sort of group in the army whose job it was this was in the Crimean War, which is between Russia and Britain, and it's a specific battle called the Battle of the Balaclava. See if I can spell that. Balaclava. And it's a famous battle, and what happened in this particular battle was that the cavalry, which is soldiers on horseback, were given the wrong instructions, and there was, if you read the poem you'll know there were 600 of them, and they were given the wrong orders. They were told to charge the enemy, even though they all knew full well that they would be going to their certain death. So it's a poem about honour and doing, fighting for your country and how great it is to be a hero, and also perhaps as well there's a little message in there that you should, well, I don't know, it's up to you how you interpret it, I suppose, but either the poet's saying it's right to do the honourable thing and do what you're told to do even though you know it's the wrong thing, but then maybe there is another message in there for those of us who are looking for it, that you shouldn't just follow blindly these instructions that you're given because you'll die. It's likely that Tenyson was trying to show how honourable these soldiers were more than anything. Once you've read the poem you can see that. So famous poet, and he wanted to write about, he was interested in writing about war and honouring your country. Now I think it's important to note that this is a pre-World War I poem, and what that means is we tend to see from a wider point of view. We don't ever see an individual's point of view, so it's never a kind of depressing look at war like we see after World War I, and we'll talk more about that when we get to exposure, if you check out that video. But pre-World War I, the poems tended to be a lot more kind of, yay, war is great, it's lovely to die for your country, how honourable. And then post-World War I, it was kind of like, why are we doing this? This is futile, we're all dying, and it's depressing, and my friend just died. So it's really nice to compare those poems, to look at how they present war. So that's a bit of a spoiler for your question at the end of this. Okay, now let's go into the quotes from the poem. So just to recap, the poem is about a group of cavalry soldiers called the Light Brigade who were given the wrong orders, which was to charge the enemy, in this case the Russians or the Cossacks, and they went into their death. They died. So they're called the 600, and a lot of them died, so they're no longer the 600. Okay, so the quotes I've picked up here begin with, "Into the valley of death rode the 600. So first thing to note is this is a biblical reference, which is often, I should say it's a funeral prayer really, because it's often said at religious funerals. So there's the first thing, they're being given a funeral, it's certain death, okay? Then we have words like valley, and we have words like the 600, which imply that there is some kind of, they're a group, they're a unit, almost like the 600, almost like they're a group of superheroes. They're being given a label because they are so honoured. Okay. So that's obviously a nice, easy quote to remember, and definitely a key quote. If you haven't already mentioned as well in your analysis before now, you could also say that road tells you that they were a cavalry. They're on horseback. What's really lovely about that, and like I said earlier about the repetition we've got coming up in a second, there's not to make reply, there's not to reason why, there's but to do and die. There's also a lot of rhyme as well in this poem. And the reason could be for that is because the rhythm symbolises sound of galloping. So the poem, this is one of the things I really love about this poem actually, is, and I love this about any poem, is when the structure ties so neatly in with the poem. It's very satisfying. So in this case we've got the there's not to make reply, there's but to not to reason why, there's but to do and die. We've got this cannon to the left and cannon to the right to them, which the rhythm sounds like the galloping of horseshoes. So that ties in really nicely. It shows the poet's clearly thought about the whole of the poem. Of course he has, he's in the AQA anthology. Anyway, someone had blundered, so not necessarily full of beautiful language or anything, but this word here is extremely important. So if you don't know what it means, it just simply means made a mistake. But even better than that is it's kind of downplaying it. So, oh, I made a blunder, you know, maybe you dropped something, or you, I don't know, left something outside in the rain, I don't know, something small, a small mistake. So it's kind of saying, oh dear, whereas in this case it's cost lives, so it's actually not a small mistake, it's downplaying the situation. I'm sure there's a better word than downplaying, but I can't think of it right now, so if you can, please leave it in the comments. So he's downplaying the situation, he's made a blunder here, whereas actually what he's done is he's cost lives, so it's actually a huge mistake. The next section, nice rhyming here, reply, why, die, and also, so that ties in with the sounds of the galloping and the rhythm, but also the repetition kind of reinforces as well that they know that it's not their responsibility to question. The soldiers would not question authority, and this is important because in this case that makes them out to be heroes, whereas very often we see people who do question things as heroes nowadays, because they're standing up for what they believe in. But in this case, the people who don't, who just do as they're told, they are seen as the heroes. Okay? There's but to do and die. And there's no kind of sadness here. It's not emotional. It's simply just that's what they have to do. They have to die because they have been ordered to do it. Beautiful bit on the next quote here, stormed at with shot and shell, and even the th sound here is useful because we've got sibilants, as you will probably know, which creates the sound of gunfire. So it's a bit of sound imagery for you, which is again something very appreciated in these war poems. We've also got at and shot, and what those words do, so stormed at with shot and shell, is they force you to pause the t. There's no kind of following on. It creates an abrupt pause, which of course could be linked to the feelings of the soldiers, if we're allowed to know how they're feeling. That's kept very hidden in this poem. Oh, sorry. But it's almost that abruptness, perhaps the abruptness of them being shot and their lives ending. It's getting a bit messy here, sorry. Okay, moving on. We've got here some lovely personification. Into the jaws of death, into the mouth of hell. So what's interesting here is it's no longer kind of airy-fairy with your blundering and your valleys and your 600, and it's actually quite scary at this point. So it's become scary. We've got the idea of death having jaws. We've got the idea of hell having a mouth. It's changed the tone of the poem, in fact. No more sort of mention of valleys in heaven. There's a tone change. Maybe because it's become very real now that these guys are going to die unnecessarily. Finally, we've got these last two quotes here which have a lot in common. So when can their glory fade? Obviously there's a rhetorical question here which is almost symbolises the admiration, because of course the answer is admiration. It's hard to talk and spell, because obviously the answer to that question is never. We will always remember them. And this poet has immortalised them through this poem so that we will always remember them. Honour the Light Brigade, honour the charge they made. So we've got all this honour, all this remembering of these soldiers and what they did for their country, which is really important. Because obviously that's a phrase that would have perhaps meant a bit more to people, well, seemingly anyway, through what we see from the pre-World War One. Dying for one's country is extremely honourable, and you've got this word glory as well, as if it was, it was good for the soldiers as well. It was, how can I word this? It was beneficial to the soldiers. So if a loved one had died in this battle, you wouldn't sit around crying about it. You would be going around saying how proud you were and how great it is, which, I don't know, contrasts with modern view that life has value and we shouldn't sacrifice any human life for a country. Maybe that's just me, but well, I know it's not just me, but maybe it's just a few people. People still do believe in being patriotic, but I think this poem really shines a light on how different war was, the attitude towards war was pre-World War One. So obviously we've been leading towards this. The question I would like you to answer for this poem is, compare how the poets of The Charge of the Light Brigade and Exposure present war. Simple as that. Of course, there are other poems that would compare well with this one, because there are many war poems in the anthology, but that's the one that we're doing today. So if you have any comments or questions or anything I've missed out, I probably have missed out quite a lot because this is a whistle-stop tour, but do please leave them in the comments and we can maybe get a discussion going in there as well, because obviously the best way to learn poetry is through discussion. Anyway, thanks for watching and I'll see you again soon. Bye!